This video will take a look at the Nixon presidency. That started in 1969. Keep in mind, Nixon was first elected in 1968, and then he was re-elected in 1972. So when Nixon first came into office, it was January of 1969. And of course, he resigned in 74. And as you can see down over here in the bottom right-hand corner, there is the headline, Nixon resigns. Ford, who was his vice president, and we'll talk about Ford later on, becomes president new. So again, Nixon presidency. There's several images here. You have the Watergate building right in there, a little bit of a political cartoon right there, which we'll talk about the president and the tape machine later on. And then, of course, you have a little bit of a look right there with the Nixon and the tapes. I seem to be having some problems with my drawing board, so let's just move forward to the next slide. And there it is. Let's get the whole thing loaded up. And let us, if I go back and take a quick look at this, what we're looking at here is the imperial presidency. This is a term that has been used often throughout government. And what we have in the upper right-hand corner here is, right up here, is the Constitution and the three branches of government. You have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And as it states in our first bullet, the Constitution attempted to create a balance between the three separate but equal branches of government. Since FDR's New Deal, FDR's New Deal back in the 1930s, which we discussed several chapters ago, presidential powers have increased dramatically. And so hence you have this concept of the imperial presidency. And here is a look at a political cartoon of the era of the 1930s, in which you have FDR sort of dressed like a king, part of that imperial presidency. Let's move on to our next slide, or sorry, our next bit there. There we go. And so, looking at our third bullet, the New Deal, World War II, and the Cold War added to the powers of the presidency. And again, as we have discussed, whenever there is a crisis within America, in the case of the Great Depression, you had the New Deal. In World War II and in the Cold War, you have three major crises. You have a financial crisis, the New Deal, of course, World War II and the Cold War are military crisis. Whenever that occurs, you have more power being given to the executive branch of the government. Our next bullet, the increase in presidential power is often referred to as an imperial presidency. I have some problems with my drawing board. See if I can get that reloaded. But again, the imperial presidency, we saw that, first heard that really the first time I remember it being referred to as the imperial presidency. Well, there we go, it's working now. Was during the Andrew Jackson presidency in the late 1820s, 1830s. And again, all the way up through even to today. You have a number of people who claim that George W. was a tyrant and blah, blah, blah. You have an equal number of people today saying the same thing about President Obama. And so essentially, what makes an imperial president is if you didn't vote for them. That's kind of what it comes down to today. Now, during the era of Andrew Jackson, during the era of Franklin Roosevelt right there, and even during the era of Richard Nixon, yeah, they're a little bit more correct about that imperial presidency, the dramatically increasing power, okay? That is what makes an imperial president. Okay. Now, I don't agree with this last statement. The expansion of power reached its peak under Richard Nixon. I say that because, again, I have seen the growth of government under the last two presidents, particularly under President Obama, but under George W. Bush. We saw a huge increase in government spending, not so much in government power, though, of course, that was part of it, because we did have a tremendous growth of government thanks to 9/11. We had the Department of Homeland Security, which was created, and thousands upon the thousands of new jobs that went into that. But again, you have seen a great rise in government power, government spending over the course of the last two presidents. So I don't agree that it reached its peak under Nixon. Now, it reached its peak to that point probably under Nixon, but we have far exceeded that. Let's go to our next slide. Let's just get this all loaded up. There we go. Nixon's domestic policy. Now, again, you're going to hear a lot of stuff, and we're going to see a lot of stuff. And if you pay attention, do a little research, you're going to hear a lot of nasty things about Richard Nixon, that he was a crook, and on and on and on. And you could argue in some ways that is true. But Nixon was a pretty good president in a lot of ways. A lot of things that Democrats like, for example, the EPA, the Endangered Species Act, I mean, a number of wage and price controls, a number of things that they believe in, he got passed. Again, it's kind of like saying, well, you know, Adolf Hitler was kind to lost puppies and his mother loved him. It's kind of hard to discount all the negative and nasty things Hitler did, and it's kind of hard to ignore and discount the things that Richard Nixon did. But again, if Watergate had not occurred, and of course you can't really do that. I mean, you can play the game, what if, and if Nixon had not been involved in Watergate, if he had come clean once he learned about the break-in, he would have gone down in history as a well above average president. Anyway, let's get to his domestic agenda. Here's a newspaper story. Nixon wins by a thin margin, pleads for a reunited nation, as all newly elected presidents do. Nixon was a Republican from California, moved the U.S. towards a more conservative direction. Now, again, I disagree with this as well. Nixon was very much more conservative than his two predecessors, Johnson and Kennedy, but he's not what we today would refer to as a conservative. And we'll talk about some of his policies, like the creation of the EPA, for example, which is not a conservative move. But again, he was more conservative than the predecessor, his predecessor, Lyndon Johnson. So yeah, he did move the country more to the right. But again, he is not really a conservative the way Ronald Reagan was. Nixon felt, and getting back to our second bullet, social programs were ineffective and states and local governments can handle the issues better. Now, this is a conservative belief. This is a conservative tenet today in the conservative platform, that the states, the local entities, are far better equipped to handle problems within the state than the federal government. Nixon eliminated many of LBJ's Great Society programs and gave those federal funds to the state and to local governments to decide to how to spend the money. And again, this goes hand in hand with right up here. The idea was that the states are far better equipped to handle issues like welfare, food stamps at that time. Of course, here in Texas, we use the Lone Star card today. But the states were better equipped to handle that. And again, LBJ in his Great Society essentially said, well, this is what we're going to do. And the federal government dictated to the states. Nixon returned a lot of that power back to the states. Power that had been taken from the states by LBJ is being given back to the states by Nixon. All right, now, this is some stuff that we've already covered in the last chapter, in chapter 14, I do believe, but we're going to hit it real quickly again. We are still continuing our look at Nixon's domestic policy. We'll look at a couple of different Supreme Court cases right here. But during Nixon's presidency, the Supreme Court continued to protect the First Amendment rights. Now, again, it depends on how you define it. For every Supreme Court case, there are winners and there are losers. And if you disagree with the Supreme Court case, well, that, again, I'm going to put you in that list of the losers, okay? Because you didn't get what you want. By saying, let's take a look at the first one, Tinker versus Des Moines School District. This is 1969. John and Mary Tinker, and they are imaged right up there. You can see them right there, holding those wristbands with the peace sign on them. John and Mary were suspended from school for wearing these black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. And again, wearing that armband is a sign of either mourning or protest. The Supreme Court ruled that the school ordering them to take those armbands off was a violation of their First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. Now, again, how you want to define speech? Well, the court has ruled that speech in this case is wearing an armband, a symbol. The court has also ruled that burning the flag, the American flag, in anger is also protected free speech, as is donating money to a political candidate. Now, I'm not sure if those were the original intentions of our founding fathers, or this is just a natural development of the Constitution. Again, I don't know. I'm not a judge. I don't see this as a loss. I see this as not a bad thing, really. As long as the protests were limited to what you see there, that armband, I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, if they're wearing, keep in mind, this is in 1969. Nixon was sworn in January of 69. So the court case originated long before he was president. Again, the original court case, the court case that the Supreme Court heard and then rendered a verdict on, that was in 69. But the original case was several years before, when LBJ was in office. So again, if they're wearing T-shirts that read, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? That's a little bit different than what we see at that armband. So protest is a protected free speech, but again, it depends on what the protest is. Let's go to our second one on this page, Wisconsin versus Yoder. This is in 1972. Again, we talked about this in the previous chapter. Amish children were required to attend high school, and this court case struck that down, saying that the Amish faith is so different than the norm that by sending their kids to school after a certain age, it violated the First Amendment right of religious freedom. Now, again, I don't really have a problem with this. Again, I think this is sort of a win-win. There are those groups whose religious beliefs are, hold on.
Good morning, Carla.
Now, again, because of the difference in the Amish religion, or Amish faith from the norm, the violation of religious freedom was ruled to be so profound that they did not have to attend public schools. Now, again, you can see this as a win for them, but if it's taken to the extreme, let us say that there is a Muslim family and they believe in jihad. I mean, these are radicalized Muslims, potential threats to American society, and they want to teach their children in their home, and they want to teach them that America is evil, and the only way, the way of the world should be run by Islam, and anyone who does not adhere to that should be killed. Well, again, their faith is vastly different than everyone else's, so should they be allowed to do that? Well, again, you could argue under the Wisconsin versus Yoder decision that they should be allowed to do that. So there is a difference between the Amish, who are peaceful. Again, yeah, they separate themselves willingly. They do not embrace technology. They are old-fashioned by our standards today. And you could argue that other religions are the same, but the Amish are not teaching their children to go out and hurt others. That because everyone else disagrees with us, just because everyone disagrees with us, does not mean we should go kill them. So again, there are levels here, and there are some differences. All right, let's move forward. Taking a little bit more time with that than I wanted to. Let us continue. with the Nixon administration. Again, that's all we'll look at in this slide presentation. And we're looking at Nixon and the environment. And as I told you, Nixon is not a conservative by our standards today. Things like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was signed into law by Nixon to protect the environment. The EPA sets air and water pollution standards, among other things. As you can see right here, we have an example. Okay, EPA fuel economy estimates. When you go look at a new car or a used car in many cases, there is a sticker on the window that you see that. How many miles per gallon does the car get in the city and the highway? How much money will this car save you over another car, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm sure you've all seen this. It is the EPA that sets those standards, and the EPA has been raising those standards for several decades. Now, you get better gas mileage by doing one of several things. You either make the car lighter, which means that the car is made out of less safe materials. Instead of using metal and making cars that were safer during an accident, the cars are now made out of lighter materials which make you less safe. Or you have less power. You have these little small go-cars, right? Little go-karts, oh man, kind of looks like a skateboard with a top on it. Anyway, those EPA fuel economy estimates are set by the EPA. And so they are constantly raising them. In order to do so, the cars become somewhat lighter in weight, which makes them a little bit less safe in an accident. And they lose power, which means it's more and more difficult to tow things. You know, you want to tow your boat to the lake, or you want to tow a trailer as you go camping. So again, is it a good idea to have the EPA to look into to protect the environment? Well, yeah, probably. Have we given the EPA too much power in setting these standards? You could argue yes. We saw under Bill Clinton, as he left office back in January of 2000, he was signing executive orders which would lower the amount of arsenic in the drinking water. Well, that sounds like a good thing. It is, okay. You know, we don't want to drink arsenic because arsenic is poison. You drink too much of it and it will kill you. And the problem was the amount that he lowered it is inconsequential. By law, you must have, and I'm making up numbers, I don't remember the exact numbers, you have to have, 50 parts per million. That was the standard before Clinton left office. He lowered it to 40 parts per million. Well, again, it's not going to change anything because 50 parts per million ain't going to kill you. What it is going to do by forcing local entities like Edinburgh to update their facilities is going to cost millions upon millions, billions of dollars across the country. And of course, who's going to pay for that? You and I, the consumer. But it made Clinton look good, made him look good in the environmental movement, that he really cared about people. But in actuality, he didn't do anything that truly benefited people. So, is it a good idea to have the standard set? To some extent, yes. But it should be done with a look at not just, well, okay, does it affect the environment? How does it affect other aspects of our life, our economy, for example, jobs? All right, let's move forward. The Endangered Species Act, law requiring, this is in 73, a law requiring the Fish and Wildlife Service to list species of plants and animals that are threatened with extinction. The law also requires the government to protect these species. And over here, and it's a little bit difficult to see because of the little doceri sign there, there's a look at the American bald eagle. Here we have in the middle, okay, a little bit of political cartoon. Here's a guy on the beach, taking his dog for a walk, and you have armed soldiers protecting piping plovers. I don't even know if that's a real bird, but maybe. Anyway, let's say the piping plovers are if I am reading that correctly, are a real bird. And so this is the extent that the government has taken in many cases to protect these endangered wild animals or plants by setting up these kinds of protections. Again, this is a political cartoon. It's a little extreme, but it kind of gets the point across. All right, we have a couple more slides and we will be done. The Equal Rights Amendment, again, we have talked about this numerous times previously. I am sorry, I used the wrong one. There we go. 1923, the National Women's Party proposed the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA. And as it states up here in the upper right, equality of rights shall, under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Pretty simplistic, okay? In 72, in the same year that Nixon was reelected to his second term, the amendment was finally approved by Congress, and it was kind of signed into law by the president, and it was sent to the states for ratification where it failed. It failed to achieve the supermajority of states ratifying it that is required. Phyllis Schlafly, who is seen right there, opposed the ERA, thinking it would reduce the rights. Hold on.
Last big sale of the year for St. Jude. Come out and support VP.
So as I was saying, Ms. Schlafly thought it would reduce the rights of women and harm family life. And she believed that it would eventually lead to things like gender-neutral bathrooms, requiring women to be drafted for the military, those types of things. She claimed it would deprive women of the right to be supported and protected by men. A truly gender-neutral society has many merits, but there also could be some drawbacks for women like the ones I just mentioned, and that is the reason why Ms. Schlafly, who is still alive today, a leader in the conservative movement, opposed it. All right. Nixon opens the door to China in 1972. Nixon becomes the first American president to visit China, and there is a look at him on the Great Wall of China. Since China's Communist Revolution in the late 1940s, the United States had refused to establish diplomatic relations with China. China is, at that time, and still is today, the largest country on the planet in terms of its population. So Nixon, who was a strong anti-communist, had created quite a reputation for himself as a member of Congress from California, and then as a vice president under Eisenhower, wanted to create a more flexible situation in Asia and to put pressure on North Vietnam to end the war. Who was one of North Vietnam's biggest supporters during the war? Well, yeah, China. And so if the United States could open the door to China to become more friendly with China, then we might be able to persuade the Chinese to exert some of its influence on North Vietnam to bring them to the table to end the war in Vietnam. Reopening China was one of Nixon's greatest foreign policy achievements. It reduced tensions between the United States and China, opened the door to trade, created all kinds of jobs. So again, this was a huge success. Why? Well, everybody knew that Nixon hated communism because of his days as a congressman and his days as a VP. And so he could then go to China without fear of someone saying, well, you're just doing it because you're a commie. Well, everybody knew that he was not one. Let's move on to our next slide. And we're having a little of a slowdown. All right. Détente with the USSR. Nixon wanted a policy of détente, or a relaxing tensions with the USSR. He wanted to halt the buildup of nuclear weapons, and here you can see some of the numbers that we're talking about. In 1972, Nixon became the first president to visit Moscow, and here he is with the Russian president. Nixon and the Soviet leaders agreed to SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. We talked about this in a previous chapter. SALT limits the development of defensive missile systems. The U.S. also sold grain to Russia, and worked with the USSR to ease tension in the Middle East. So again, because of détente, a willingness to sort of relax tensions, Russia was able to help us with some of the issues in the Middle East, which of course is an important area because of oil and the ongoing war that has been going on for centuries, thousands of years. And both us and Russia, reduced nuclear weapons. So again, Nixon had a number of good points during his presidency. Nixon's vice presidents. Nixon had used a campaign slogan of law and order, but unfortunately, people within Nixon's own government were corrupt. His first VP, Spiro Agnew, resigned when it was found out that when he was governor of Maryland, he took bribes. Gerald Ford was appointed VP when Spiro Agnew resigned, because what happened when he was governor of Maryland. And so when Nixon resigns in '74, Ford would become president, and he would be the only president who was not elected by the people of the United States. Now, again, we've had VPs who became president, but they were elected to the office of VP. Ford was not elected to the office of VP. He was appointed by Nixon, becomes VP when Nixon resigns. A couple more slides and we'll be done. The Watergate crisis, and again, we've covered this before. The 1972 former CIA agents who were working for the committee to re-elect the president broke into the Watergate complex, which was the where the headquarters of the Democrat Party was located. Two investigative reporters right here, Woodward and Bernstein, exposed the link between Nixon and the burglars who broke into the Watergate building to bug the Democrat Party headquarters. Nixon attempted to cover up the investigation on the grounds that involved national security. Again, pretty simple stuff. We've covered this previously. What Nixon should have done, what he needed to do, was to come clean. If he would have come out and said, you know, this happened, I'm sorry, the people who did it work for me, they've been fired, I will turn the names over to the Attorney General, they will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, he would have survived. But because of the work done by Woodward and Bernstein in the book All the President's Men, and Nixon's attempt to cover it up, Nixon was forced to resign. So we continue with the Watergate crisis. A special prosecutor was appointed to look for wrongdoing. Under oath, a Nixon aide stated that Nixon was part of the Watergate cover-up. Well, how did we know this? Well, Nixon had installed recording devices in the White House, in the Oval Office, so he could record his conversations for future generations to hear. The Senate wanted to listen to them, but Nixon refused, claiming executive privilege, that the executive branch is separate from the other two branches, and what we do here is our business. What you do there is your business. Nixon claimed if he turned over the tapes, it would lead to judicial control over the executive branch, again, violating the concept of separate but equal. Violating the separate but equal powers of the Constitution. And again, here is a headline of the day and a little bit of a political cartoon. Okay, we're down to about our last slide. The Watergate crisis continues. United States versus Nixon, 1974. The Supreme Court ordered Nixon to turn over the tapes, proving that no one is above the law. And this is a good thing that came out of it. When the Nixon tapes were released, they revealed Nixon had lied about his involvement in a cover-up. Now, again, in the cover-up only. He was not part of the initial break-in, but he did participate in the cover-up. He even went as far as to delete certain portions of the tapes that incriminated him. The United States House of Representatives sought to impeach Nixon, to charge Nixon with a crime, but instead of that, before that was done, Nixon became the first president to resign. So he was going to be impeached. He was going to be charged. He was going to be found guilty in a trial in the Senate. So instead of doing that, he resigned. And here's the headline of Nixon resigning. The impact of Watergate. And this is our last one. First time a president's ever resigned. The only time a president has resigned. It continued to lower the confidence of the United States government. Again, thanks to the credibility gap created by LBJ in Vietnam. This undermined America's belief in our government even. It showed presidential power could create opportunities for abuse. Proved our government is based on laws and a system of checks and balances, and that, most importantly, it works. The system of checks and balance works. Strengthen the role of the press in informing the public, going back to the muckraking of the early 1900s. It is the media's job not to cheer for one side or the other, but to expose wrongdoing by either side. And then finally, Congress passed new laws to limit presidential powers like the War Powers Act. So, again, Nixon was a pretty good president, all things considered, if you exclude Watergate. If you take into account Watergate, then again, he was a failed president. All right, we are done. It took a little bit longer than anticipated, but it's over.